Today, we'll try to understand various aspects of data protection and what steps should be taken to protect data that is valuable to an organization. And there couldn't have been a better time to discuss all this because for today's discussions, we have a very knowledgeable and insightful speaker. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker from Thales. It is my pleasure to introduce Ved Prakash, Senior Business Development Leader, heading the banking and enterprise for India and SAARC regions at Thales. Welcome to the show, Ved.
Thanks, Mukbil. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I really like the context, which is very relevant in today's time. And I would definitely share some of my practical experience interacting in the market with customers. How are they addressing or tackling these kind of challenges, and hope that really benefits the participants and audiences listening to us today.
Absolutely great to start with the conversation. Now, you have already touched very, very briefly on this subject. Would you like to elaborate on the growing challenges, particularly in the data protection domain for organizations today?
Absolutely, Mikbul. And as you rightly said, the context that today businesses have become data-driven and data is everywhere in your enterprise. So much of this data is sensitive and valuable. It can represent your customers' financial information, health information, and most important, their personal information. So safeguarding the personal information data has become the #1 priority for all the organizations in this new technology environment that comprises your cloud, virtualization, big data, containers, IoT, blockchain, etc. So you also need to prove to the auditors that you maintain the control and security of this data and meet the broad range of regulations and compliance requirements. So that basically brings me to address the key challenge or concerns, I would say. #1 begins with addressing the customer data privacy points, where how do you protect the PII data wherever it resides within your IT infrastructure, be it in files, any databases, or any server, anywhere, without disrupting IT operations or doing any changes in business applications, whether it's on-premise or in multi-cloud or in hybrid kind of environment. So that's #1. The second is extension to it in terms of lack of visibility on the customer information, where it is going, which user or departments are accessing this sensitive data. So how are you doing data discovery and classification today? That is another challenge to meet. Then we all are aware of rising incidents and data breaches today. India has been ranked top 3 countries suffering from the ransomware attacks. How do you protect against these data breaches? That's another challenge area to address. And then you all called out about regulations. So growing compliance and regulatory requirement are also enforcing data protection. If you've seen in RBI and IDRBT, which are regulators for banks, NPCI for payments, UIDAI for Aadhaar-enabled services wherever Aadhaar number is used, IRDA for insurance, SEBI for capital markets. Then you have IT Act, which is binding to everyone. You have PCI guidelines, which is related with card transactions specifically. And of course, GDPR and upcoming data privacy bill. All these are bringing the element of data protection, very focused, very vital today as an initiative in the organizations to look at. And the last and very important challenge that comes to my mind is that problem of data silos are existing across the organizations. What I mean by this is that there has been a highly fragmented approach where organizations have historically rolled out many single-purpose data protection tools. And these products can only secure a specific type of data, system, or environment, which results in a complexity in managing them, escalating cost, and they are not able to scale up with growing business requirements. So these are some of the, I would say, key challenges today organizations are facing through in addressing the digital transformation initiatives.
So, Ved, you have very brilliantly touched on, some of the very basic challenges. For example, lack of visibility, discovery and classification of data, breaches, etc. Now, against such a background, what are the key technologies that can be used and can be really, really helpful in terms of data protection for enterprises and particularly, their crown jewels?
So the technologies that I called up lays the foundation of data protection. When it comes to adoption or to begin the key technology to consider, we all know that encryption as a technology tool is used for securing data because it protects your privacy, confidentiality, and integrity of the data. So it is one of the best control to secure data at rest in transit. And it is also considered to be a last line of defense in event of breach. Here, the protection is applied to data itself, independent of the data's location. So it ensures your data remains secure wherever it goes and renders it useless to attackers. And it helps to secure both your structured and unstructured data within your organization without disrupting your IT operations or any application changes. You can encrypt the sensitive data across all your physical locations in your cloud environment. You may also choose to tokenize the data, you mask the data based on the business use case. So the core technologies for data protection comprises use of encryption, tokenization, data masking, and most important is the centralized key management system. So this is the core technologies, Mukbil, that are really
right. Very heartening to know that there are several tools and technologies that can be used for data protection. And you have also touched on the very critical component of any data in protection strategy, which is the encryption technology. Now, in such a context, what are the best practices that organizations or enterprises should follow in against this context of the encryption technology which is being used to protect data?
Great question, Mukbil. In fact, the encryption adoption involves a very clear understanding of which data needs to be encrypted. So, and then where can I run the encryption process that doesn't cause any performance overheads or IT operation impact or any application changes? So it is necessary to, or you need to understand, is it necessary to do any kind of application changes? If yes, what type of changes do you need to consider? So who is responsible for the entire encryption management process and most critical component, the encryption key? So when you do encryption, the risks are passed to encryption key, which is shared with the user to access the data. It is very important to protect the key in order to avoid their availability to everyone and manage their life cycle in a secure way. So you must necessarily decide a logical management of encryption keys because it's a critical point. You need to understand what happens if you lose your encryption keys. You lose the data. And this concept is called, decoupling keys from the data. So it is important to implement a robust key management system that you want to use for different keys, for different applications, schedule their replacement with rotation, and distributing them from a center point to a target systems automatically with an overview of keys that are in use and for what purpose they are being used, who is accessing these keys, when these keys can be rotated or revoked automatically. And you should have a single pane of glass and centralized controls to keep your distributed data safe and protected according to your organization security policies. So these are some of the core pointers, or I would say a practice that organizations need to consider in adoption of encryption technology to protect the data.
Very valid points coming from Ved. Now, I want to touch on another, very crucial aspect and critical element of the tech landscape, which we have all been observing, and that is cloud computing. Now, if we were to look at the tech landscape today, cloud has really emerged as the fulcrum, as the most critical component of the digital transformation journey of organizations. And its adoption is increasingly growing, and more and more business critical applications are moving to the cloud. So, in all this situation, what do you think are the major concerns for leaders as far as data protection is concerned? Because as I feel, and according to my own interactions with uh, uh, technology and industry leaders, I've come to understand that as far as cloud is concerned, security tends to remain at the back of their minds. So, what are the biggest challenges that organizations face when it comes to cloud security? Because as we see that cloud has become so integral to the tech landscape that it's impossible to escape it. Your views on it, Ved?
Yes, Mukbil, absolutely bang on to this, I would say, emerging concern area. And in a cloud environment, the number one challenge in the cloud journey that organizations are grappling with is who is responsible for security in the cloud, not security of the cloud. That's the key, I would say, a point to emphasize. And
Yes,
then
yes.
cloud service providers follow something called shared responsibility framework. So shared responsibility framework dictates the security obligation of cloud service provider and its users to ensure the accountability. And in this model, it is very clearly called out whether you are taking the approach of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service model, you are responsible for the security of the data, and hence this obligation is on you to manage the controls of securing this data. And then you come with the thoughts that how do I maintain the security controls on this data in the cloud infra? How do I manage the PII data risk that are associated with it? How do I manage the audits that bind me to look to meet the compliance regulations, the best security practices? Then the other challenge comes is when you're looking in spreading to multi-cloud. Now, adoption of multi-cloud environment is creating also operational complexity because each cloud have their unique capabilities and controls. So you need to understand what are the major functional risk areas when you're moving in cloud. Typically, the first one that comes to my mind is on encryption key visibility, which means all your cloud service portals provide you a very limited visibility to the key management and access by their users and by the privileged users. Then the second risk would be on data loss, because you have this insufficient authorization control or DR services to ensure that keys are not accidentally or intentionally deleted. The third is corresponding to data deletion risk. So when you request to delete a cloud resource, this may not result in true wiping of the data, either because extra copies of the data are stored but not available, or because the disk to be destroyed also stores the data from other client. So this is a big risk. Third important, which I've seen customers struggling, is on vendor lock-in situation. They do not want to get logged with the specific cloud service provider. And if you are using any of the native encryption and key management systems by native cloud service provider, it is very hard and expensive to move to another provider. So that is, again, one of the other important risk areas. Then attaining compliances, both your internal and external regulations require you that the control of encryption keys resides with the cloud user and not with the cloud service provider. And that brings a lot of challenge in terms of addressing this regulatory requirement. How do you get control of that point? And then very important piece is in terms of the key lifecycle management. What I mean is that all these native cloud service provider key management services have a very limited ability to automate the life cycle of keys when it's spread across multiple subscription. And it's become very manual, complex, and inefficient in terms of doing it manually. So these are core risk areas that needs to look at. And the controls that I have seen organizations adopting to overcome these functional risk areas are that all these leading service providers, cloud service providers, they provide you with your native encryption and key management, but then the data protection mandates requires that these keys be stored and managed by the customers. And the cloud service provider fulfill this mandate by enabling something called customer key control, which allows you for creating, having the ownership, separating and doing the revocation of encryption keys. And this approach is called bring your own key. It is very useful for all this SaaS and PaaS environment. And if you are adopting this infrastructure as service, then you should go for bring your own encryption, which gives you a total control on securing your data in the cloud. Here, you don't use the native encryption technique provided by the cloud service provider, but bring your own protection measure. So these are important, Mukbil, to consider. And one recent, I would cite conversation with the CTO, who reminded me that with currently the data sovereignty issue, especially with the crisis of Russia, Ukraine that has been witnessed across. What happens tomorrow if all these leading cloud service providers say decide to share the data with the US government, being in certain obligation? What is the control that we are left with? Because all these leading cloud service providers are US based, be it Google, be it AWS, be it Azure. So what is that left with me in my interest to secure the data in cloud? And especially bring your own keys and bring your own encryption are the really very critical interventions to meet these obligations and address this risk that I called out.
Right, Ved, I think you have brilliantly shed light on the various aspects and nuances of and the risks associated with this digital transformation of journey as they try to incorporate an increasingly greater element of cloud in their infrastructure. And you have rightly touched on several key challenges and aspects. For example, the shared responsibility model, which again is something that enterprises will have to navigate, the sovereignty principle. All this brings me to something that you have referred also during your previous response. So to a normal technology leader, how do you explain what is the difference between a cloud native key management and external key management, and which do you think is recommended for better security?
Sure, Mukbil. This is a fantastic point that most of people ask and need to understand. See, cloud native encryption, the cloud service provider is responsible for both encryption and the key management. They can encrypt everything, yes. But then there is no segregation of duty. So you won't get protection against the privileged user misuse or the rogue system admin scenarios that can happen. And then most important, you don't own keys to the data. So owner of the keys is the cloud provider. So in theory, cloud service provider can look into your encrypted data, which is not good and no organization would want. And that's where this external key management helps you to meet or mitigate this risk associated with use of native cloud server key management, where it helps you to align with decoupling of the encryption keys from the dataset principle, meaning that encryption keys should always be segregated and separately managed from application owners in a certified key management system, which is accredited with FIPS 140-2 level kind of assurance. And then that helps you to ensure that you achieve separation of duties in the encryption process implemented in the applications. And it also makes sure that all keys at different applications are managed without fail automatically. And these keys are rotated periodically. So these are the major significant advantages.
Right. Now, I would want to come to, another very crucial aspect of any data protection discourse, which is, and we already see that happening in our own country, and which I've also alluded to during my contest setting, is that, the introduction of various legislations for data protection and privacy. Now, we also have this data protection bill coming up in our own country. So against this background, how do you see the data protection and security landscape really evolving around it?
So absolutely right, Mukbil. This has been debated for last 2 years, and we are still waiting for data protection bill to finally happen. But then you rightly said that with inclusion of this, there would be a lot of changes in the security landscape overall across the organizations. Organizations that have already matured in a journey, or some are which are already aligning with the GDPR kind of regulations, they may not go through much change, but a lot other organizations mid-size would definitely go for change. And a core area that would come in effect is privacy by design principle. That constitutes the heart of data protection bill, which has to be incorporated across all your digital initiatives, enabling you or organizations to implement a consistent data protection strategy across the organization to comply with the best security practices. And while the businesses will still require customers' consent before data collection, but areas related to data processing, its storage, retention, and management will require a focus, appropriate technology controls to address these areas from security perspective. So this would how I see a lot of thrust coming in with this bill.
Right. So Ved, it's been a lovely, lovely discussion today. And wrapping up, I would really want you to, really make your recommendations as the best fit data protection strategy for organizations today, particularly in the context of rising challenges of breaches, ransomware attacks, cyber crimes of all kinds, which have seen an uptick over the past few years. Your recommendations for organizations today?
So I would say, Mukbil, the recommendations or the approach that we go and suggest is to adopt a data-centric security solution, for which organization needs to thoroughly understand its own data risk and business needs. See, you need to understand that data-centric security is not one-size-fits-all proposition. Within a single organization, there can be dozens of security policies, hundreds of data types, and thousands of use cases. So where you need to start is to first conduct a data risk assessment exercise, which means that you need to identify where your sensitive data is, discover it and classify it, and then you decide on appropriate data risk remediation controls, like some data might require encryption, while other data may need to be tokenized or masked or left as it is. So a consistent data protection strategy should be supporting the fundamental requirement of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information to the users. And then it should address the broad range of security objectives within their organization, which enables to secure the data across all the environment, as I called out, physical, virtual, cloud, and big data. And then it should offer you support for all the existing platforms like Windows, Linux, Unix. And most important is that you should have a centralized control to keep your distributed data safe. And that is where I think from Thales, we bring a platform called Cypher Trust, which basically gets aligned to address this data security strategy for the organizations to look at.
Would you like to elaborate on this, Ved?
So this is a platform that Thales provide and has been implemented by all the global organizations who are really keen to address the data security concerns. And this platform name is called Cypher Trust Data Security Platform. And this helps you to enable the journey across your safeguarding the data across the life cycle of it. And it helps to bring no IT operation changes with minimal or no impact on business applications, and is very easy to use. And the heart of the system is the key management that really works for addressing the data protection needs for the organizations for both data at rest and data in motion.
Wonderful inputs coming from Ved, and I must thank you for brilliantly describing how a consistent data protection strategy is the need of the hour as enterprises navigate the extremely complicated technology landscape of today, which is evolving very fast, and how all of this really starts with the first step, which is the discovery of important and sensitive data in your enterprise.
Exactly. Correct, Mukbil.
And I think that is the first step which all enterprises need to undertake if they really want to be future ready in terms of data protection. Thank you, Ved. This has been an extremely exciting talk. And however, in the interest of time, we will need to wrap this up. I'm sure the attendees will have a lot of knowledge and takeaways from here. Have a great day ahead, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, Mukbil. Thanks. Have a good day.